Oh, the big bad government shutdown. Do the American people even care? Today on Fresh Freedom, we're breaking down all the inside baseball of Washington politics and tying it back to the broken budget process in Congress. Welcome to the Fresh Freedom Podcast, featuring freedom-focused representatives and policy experts who are fighting for conservative values and defending your constitutional rights. I'm Nate Lucas, joined alongside Representative Eric Burleson from Missouri's 7th District, and our special guests are Congressman Russ Fulcher from Idaho's 1st District and Eric Teitzel, CEO of the Center for Renewing America. We are calling this podcast episode Shutdown 101. As we enter really the third and fourth week of the Schumer shutdown here in Washington, D.C. And Congressman, I think the origin of this is really just to get the word out about what these shutdowns are, who's impacted, and if the American people even care. Yeah,
I mean, if anything, I think what you can definitively say is that this system is broken, right? Our way of financing the federal expenditures is not working. We for 30 almost 30 years, we never passed the 12 appropriation bills on time. We end up, pushing it all the way to the deadline. And I think the reason is because it's so big. The federal government has become so large. It's just too monumental of a task to get all these appropriations done by September 30th. Well, by September 30th, we're supposed to have passed these, and because we didn't, the government shuts down. Now, each year, they end up doing these continuing resolutions, and it's really Congress admitting that we failed. And this time around, we passed a continuing resolution. I had a hard time voting for it because it's basically Joe Biden's budget. But that's, at the end of the day, we basically sent them exactly what they had voted for before, just for 7 weeks. And it's remarkable that they're choosing to not accept it. Their own budget.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really something when you look at it, I just don't understand why it has become so difficult to get the appropriations process completed. Isn't that part of the job?
I'll just jump in here. I think that part of this is the Democrats' line in the sand of trying to relitigate the big, beautiful bill. They didn't like how that came down, and so they picked this time for political purposes to say, hey, you know what, we didn't like that, and we're going to demand $1.5 trillion incremental dollars in spending. Okay, and not only are we going to demand that $1.5 trillion incremental dollars in spending, we're going to ask for what, in my view, is some of the most egregious demands in that process by saying we want to have taxpayer-funded health care for illegals. We want to repeal the very modest work requirement for healthy working-age people in order to qualify for Medicaid. And, there's some other things. We want to put the funding back in for transgender surgery, that kind of thing. So they knew when they did this that there's no way that the Republicans are going to go for it. And so at the end of the day, this is Schumer, Hakeem, and they're just saying, okay, we got to exhibit to our base that we're going to fight the man, right? And that's what they're trying to do, trying to fight the man. They know that this is not going to prevail. They know they're not going to prevail with this. But the interesting thing is they're willing to put the American people through this just so they could make the statement that somehow, we're willing to stand up to President Trump.
I think it's right that you were very skeptical of the CR. Conservatives know for years and have known that CRs are a vehicle that the establishment uses, that the swamp uses.
Not a great way to govern.
To bypass the way we should do our jobs, which is to get in the weeds, do the work, pass appropriations bills. And instead you can kick the can, and that typically results in the only thing worse than a CR, which is an omnibus written by leadership, kept in a drawer, that continues the fiscal disaster that has been American spending and debt for so long. I think the one thing that is unique about this situation is that the tables have been turned thanks to the president and his willingness to use executive power to actually reduce the size and scope of government. So while on the one hand, we are doing a CR at Joe Biden's levels of spending, in a world where we know, as you rightly pointed out, after 30 years, that spending has only ever gone in one direction, which is up, to keep it flat year over year is a win. And when you add on top of that, not just keeping spending flat, but doing the impoundments and the rescissions, cutting USAID, cutting the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Which is driving the left nuts.
Exactly. No, I think that's the win here for conservatives. And while we do want to open up the government because we should function as a society and have a government that runs and our soldiers need to be paid and so on, we should also recognize that we have Democrats over the barrel and we should not give in and give up to the demands that they're making that you laid out.
So you've been back in the district. I mean, the House passed this clean CR September 19th. What are you hearing from constituents? I think by and large, a lot of the American people say, shut the government down. They don't do anything for me. But then maybe they have something impact them, whether it's a delay at an airport, something impacts them that goes, oh, wait, yeah, we do need this government to function.
I've really literally only had 2 people have any kind of complaint about the shutdown. By and large, everyone I talk to in the district is like, keep it shut down. They want it shut down permanently. And frankly, one of the most inspiring things was to see Russ Vought say, we're not just going to do furloughs, we're going to take this opportunity to do terminations. And people back in the district were ecstatic. I would be at church and people would come up to me and say, finally, you guys are, they feel like we're beating the Democrats. And we are, because they are, I think the No Kings rally is like a great epitome of where the Democratic Party is. When you go watch these rallies, no one has any idea what they're really protesting. No one has any real legitimate claim that Trump is acting like a king. The fact that they're protesting alone is proof enough that there is no king, right? That they can protest. The other thing is how many things that Trump tries to do is overturned by a court decision in some way, shape, or form. That doesn't happen when you have a king. And then if Trump were a king, he could pass anything he wants. And obviously, it's very difficult for that to happen. So there is really no reason for them to protest, which is why everybody that interviewed these people found them completely devolve because they have no policy to stand on. And that's where the Democratic Party is too. When leadership is confronted with or presented with their own budget and they say, no, that's not acceptable. I think that the press, even the press who's left-leaning, is not buying the Democratic position.
Mr. Fulcher, you sort of swung by the No Kings rally, not to join them, but just to see what the lunatics were up to.
Well, I was here and I was curious because, I'm thinking, what are they going to protest? Are they going to protest safe borders? Are they going to protest safer cities, a decent economy? Are they going to, there's a lot of things that, let's face it, are going pretty good, all things considered. And so I was just curious, and so I did. I was an observer for a portion of the Pro Kings rally, and not surprisingly, it was all about bashing Trump to a large extent, and it was, hey, this guy is deporting illegals, he's deporting criminals, right? As if that's some sort of a bad thing, and he's put tariffs on other countries, and he's got policing going on in cities, and and then it was equally interesting to hear who they were praising. There was a lot of commentary about this mayoral candidate in New York, Mondami, I think is the guy's name, who's an avowed socialist, and he's out openly promoting things like getting rid of private ownership in New York, right? So that the government will distribute the housing and all kinds. And so it dawned on me that, wait a minute here. They got the name wrong, because what they're really promoting, the policies are really promoting, is the exact thing that leads to a king, right? Yeah. Because if you're doing what the president's doing and you're enforcing the rule of law, and you're encouraging the economy, and you're creating and helping peace throughout the world, what do those things do? That results in individual empowerment, right? That results in the power to people, to individuals. But if you're out there and you're promoting, let's get rid of things like private ownership, let's remove police officers and replace them with social workers, what does that do? That is a type of activity that leads to the need for like a hard-handed government king type setup. And so I left that with the perception of one of two things is going on. Either number one, these people just haven't figured that out, what they're really protesting or involved with, or they understand completely and they just hate America. They just hate who we are. They hate the foundation. They hate capitalism. They hate a free market. They hate the prosperity. They hate, the foundation of the United States of America. And it's probably a combination of both, but it was just an amazing phenomenon to watch.
Yeah, it certainly is. And, we all saw the clips of the people, whether they were outliers or not, I don't know. I wasn't there, but enough clips of people celebrating the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
And it does make you realize that there is a critical mass of the American people who have rejected every single one of the most foundational tenets upon which our nation stands. And the president is doing something about it. Bringing justice and order back to America, and they're rebelling against his attempt.
Something really sick and twisted. Something's broke in their brain, really. I mean, when you see them celebrate the martyrdom of Charlie Kirk, at some point, I've got to make an appeal to the reasonable Democrat, right, who voted for Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and voted for, JFK, right? At some point, that party, at some point you got to recognize your party, you're losing your party and the fundamental principles that the Democratic Party had. And I say that because I wish we were at a point where we could debate, we just had differing views on fundamental things. Like, we all wanted to fund the police and have secure, safe and secure cities. We just have a difference of opinion about how that happens. Or we all want good education for our kids. We just have a different view on maybe. That's where you can have debate. Oftentimes I hear people say, why don't you guys never compromise. How do you compromise with a group of people that say, I want to teach your child at 5 years old how to trans and sexualize and bring in drag show story hour? There is no compromise in that. I'm not going to say, well, only with the parent's signature. No, there's ridiculous. They've gone, what's Spaceballs? Remember the movie Spaceballs where he says, we've gone plaid? Literally the Democratic Party has gone past ludicrous speed and gone plaid.
You bring up such a good point. If I could just provide at least a perspective on that. I've thought the same thing. How do we get this far apart? How did the divide get so large? And one of the conclusions that I've come to is ultimately this is a battle of worldviews. We've got, I'll just call it a Christian worldview, which is that foundational set of values that contain moral absolutes, right? That standards that don't change. It's a guideline of rules, and it's a biblical Christian worldview that's a marker. And you can forever, if you subscribe to that, then you've got a marker of right and wrong that don't change. You've got that versus, I'll call it a secular worldview, just because I don't know what else to call it. But those who take a viewpoint that, wait a minute, there is no such thing as moral absolutes. There is no such thing as a foundational belief system that is constant. Therefore, right and wrong is determined about the circumstances of the time or the circumstances of the situation. Well, when you think about that, you can rationalize anything, including the killing of Charlie Kirk or anything. That's a dangerous place to be. But with you. I couldn't concur more. You said it so well. It's like, how did we get here? And how can we compromise? You can't compromise those certain things. But that's maybe my feeble mindset is I think ultimately that's what's going on. We've got these competing worldviews and they just aren't compatible.
Did God really say? Right? That's the very first question that Satan asks of Adam and Eve. Did God really say that we were made in his image and therefore have inherent dignity from womb to tomb? Did he really say you were created male and female? Did he really say that man and a woman should be married and have children and fill the earth and multiply and have dominion over the earth and steward it? Or did he say that marriage can be whatever you want, your gender can be whatever you want? Did God really say kids are a good thing, or are they a scourge on the planet and a drain on our scarce resources? It is fundamentally a religious question. I couldn't agree with you more.
So, I mean, to that, I kind of think you're right. And oftentimes politicians don't like shy away from the religious kind of thing. But I think, if anything, it's like when you see the fact that the left unites with terrorists like Palestine, Hamas, people in Hamas want to kill, Jews, and you kind of go, what the hell is wrong with these people? Why would they possibly justify? I mean, and the fact that you've got people that are LGBTQ plus divided pie sign, right, whatever, they're uniting with people that are pro-Palestinian. And if they lived in Palestine or in Gaza, they would be stoned or whatever, right? So the question is, what in the world brings them together? And I think the common thing is that they both have a shared enemy, and that is the church. Mm-hmm. That is the traditional Christian values that really kind of built this country. And that's why they have their shared goal is to destroy the foundations of what this country was created or was made for.
Well, it's ironic that they attack, Charlie Kirk, because one of Charlie's main points or themes was that a lot of the left is spiritually nihilistic. And I think it's pretty evident when you watch these protests and these people operate that they really are just void of a common good. And that's terrifying. And I think it's even more terrifying that there were 7 million of these people that protested nationwide. So that suggests that it is a large number. That's a big deal. So when 7 million people in your country are this angry and they are willing to go protest at this level, it seems very coordinated too. So just throwing that out there.
There's hope though, and I for one am a little bit encouraged right now because I'm not sure about where you respectively live or Missouri, but I can tell you in Idaho, there's been a significant positive response to almost a revival mindset, right? I have my home church is in Meridian, Idaho. The attendance is up significantly since the assassination, right? And it's a lot of youth that are seem to be moving on that. When I'm not there, I'm in different parts of the state. Same thing in other churches. Over this shutdown, I was invited to speak to a bunch of some clergy from the UK. They said the same thing, and so as tragic as that circumstance was, at least I think there's some evidence that that's tripped the heartstrings and the minds of a lot of people, especially the youth. And I think God is using that in a positive way. But at the same time, what happens, when one side is enforced, right, the other is going to push back probably too, right? And so that might make the conflict that much more stark. But certainly there's positive things that I think is going on too.
I want to ask about a couple pieces of legislation. I know you have a balanced budget amendment that is out there that would at least help get us away from these continuing resolutions and back on the right track. And Mr. Fulcher, you have a one subject at a time act. So if both of you could just kind of explain both of those to the people, that might be helpful.
Yeah, I'll start. Look, I mean, whenever I was a state legislator, it infuriated me, and it still infuriates me that we do not balance our budget on the federal level. We do it every year in Missouri, and we do it by May 15. Actually, before that. So it's put in the Constitution. The people demanded it, and I'm really grateful that we did pass what was called the Hancock Amendment, and made sure that The legislature has to do its job. They cannot deficit spend without an emergency declared. That needs to happen in Congress. Now, my balanced budget amendment is unique. What it does is it says that Congress cannot raise its own debt ceiling. The states have to vote to raise the debt ceiling. So by doing that, I'm doing two things. I'm putting us back on a fiscal path of sanity, and then two, I'm returning some of these powers back to the states, which is where it originally was before the 16th Amendment was passed, which allowed income taxes to be collected at the federal level, and before the 17th Amendment, which allowed for the popular vote of senators. Prior to that, which was 1913, imagine this is how the United States operated. Very much almost like the United Nations operates, where the federal government would come to the states and say, here's our proposed spending. And with your permission, can you please write a check, right? They would come hat in hand a request from the states. And the states could go, oh, why are you spending money on, drag queen story hour in Peru? Why are you spending? No, we're not going to write that check, right? That doesn't happen today because the federal government passed the 16th Amendment. They tax directly. So this, to me, that's why I worked with the Goldwater Institute to try to craft something that's, gives kind of that outlet, but puts some discretion back in the power of the states.
That's good stuff. Well, on a similar vein, actually, also rooted in a state legislature, because I was a state senator and in state senate leadership, but in the state of Idaho, we had a governing rule, and it was called the single subject rule. And any piece of legislation had to have had a single germane subject matter to it. And as you know, in Washington, D.C., so much of what we do is done via omnibus style legislation, where literally you've got everything thrown into 1,000+ page bill, right? You've got healthcare and tax policy and transportation and probably some defense along the way. So we have these big omnibus bills that there's always good, there's always bad, and then as a member, you're forced to weigh the good versus the bad and say, okay, I got to go yes or no, and so you got to take that bad with the good and then make a judgment call, and it's a poor way to govern, right? And in our state, and what I've proposed here, the very first piece of legislation that I offered when I came into Congress, and we do it every year, and we're starting to get just a little bit more support slowly, is this single subject rule. It just simply says, look, when we take up a vote, when we take up a piece of legislation, the germane subject matter needs to be constant. You can't combine all of this stuff. Doesn't mean there can't be variations to it. It's got to be workable and manageable, but by doing that, I think we have a much more honest engagement in the arena of ideas. I think that that we can make much better decisions. It does tend to eliminate those earmark style pieces of legislation, which I don't agree with anyway, frankly, because by the nature of a single subject matter, you can't tuck in there a bridge in Hoboken, New Jersey, whatever. Those things aren't allowed. But I think we would be much better served if we governed on a single subject basis.
So to kind of wrap all of this up, we heard a top senator yesterday come out and just explicitly say that shutdowns are an opportunity to get political leverage. Seems kind of sick. They're trying to add $1.5 trillion, as you mentioned, in radical new spending to a bill that should just be about simply funding the government. But I was caught by a statistic recently. So the WIC, the Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, it served about 6.7 million participants each month in fiscal year 2024. There's an estimate that 41% of all infants in the United States are on this supplemental nutritional program. That is a unbelievable number. 41% of all infants. So I don't necessarily, I hear the talking points even from Republicans that are like, well, we've got to do this because this the SNAP benefits, we need $8 billion in November. How long can we sustain a culture in which 41% of infants come out of the womb and are on government assistance? I mean, at some point, don't we need to act like conservatives? How are we going to get there?
I totally agree, 100%. I mean, there's something wrong, and I think that it leads to people who are not out there working, at least people that are not taxpayers, they're tax recipients. And I bet you if you went through these No Kings rallies, most of them are falling in that bucket. That most of them are dependent in some way, shape, or form from the federal government. And that's why we are where we are.
A lot of that needs to be changed. I don't think there's any way you can argue otherwise if you're a conservative. One thing that came to mind when you were saying that is, okay, why aren't we more courageous in taking some of that on? And I'm sure the reasons are many, but I think one of them that at least comes to mind right now is 2-year election cycles. From a party standpoint, a leadership standpoint, it seems like there's so much pressure that, hey, we just got to get through this next election cycle. We don't want to take up something that's, quote, controversial, right? We don't want to force people to, hear this term, bleed on legislation, right? Because let's face it, right? There's going to be some blowback when you go try to remove a government benefit or a government program, even though, is it the right thing to do? Yeah, it definitely is. And I'm not making excuses. I'm just sharing an observation. I think that's a factor. And we all deal with it. Campaigns, election cycles have turned into these mammoth expenditures. I don't know that our founders ever really foresaw what that might really turn into over time. But to your point, that needs to happen. And I think other things fall into that category. Our debt, I think we've been reluctant to truly deal with that, in part because of these cycles. And until we come to grips with that, I'm not sure we're collectively going to find the courage. Or another thing, until the system just completely breaks down. Right. And whether it's fiscal, probably fiscal, things just collapse and you have to rebuild brick by brick. That may be how some of this gets addressed.
Nate, I think there are a lot of bleak numbers out there, and you pointed to some of the bleakest. I saw a stat in this debate over Medicaid that we've been having that like more than half of Californians are enrolled on the state's Medicaid program. Student loan debt has surpassed all other forms of consumer debt, including mortgages in this country. People are hurting, and there are a lot of explanations for that. Many of which go back decades. But I think for me, what it all points to is this political moment that we've been living through for the last 10 years, where a guy like President Trump came onto the scene with a whole new paradigm, a whole new way of speaking and talking about America, and appealed to a whole masses of Americans who feel like the system wasn't working for them. Something was fundamentally broken. And they weren't wrong about that. And we're still trying to sort out how to get this thing right. And I think you look at the president's efforts to restructure an economy around building and making things in America, around immigration and the deportations, which will have a very positive effect on the ability of working class people in America to get higher wages and make a living. Yeah. This is all part of that bigger project that the president has embarked on, and that I think was a long time coming, and I'm grateful that at least we have the opportunity now to get our hands in and do some things that haven't been done in a generation or more.
So just last question, lightning round. Where do we go from here? I mean, any predictions on when a shutdown might end? This CR was going to go through November 21st. I don't really like which side is going to flinch first, I suppose.
Well, obviously I don't know, but if I had to predict, I'd say it'll be probably within a couple of weeks, and it's going to be the paychecks not happening for our military families that light up the switchboards and put on the pressure high enough for the Democrats to start voting yes.
think that's probably right. There's a strange dynamic here where we're fighting over a CR that ends in just less than a month now. And the one that you all passed kind of becomes irrelevant at some point. You'll have to come back in and do something else. So we know for sure it's not going past that date, I would imagine. And something's going to have to give one way or another.
Yeah, to your point about, where we are, a static spending CR or spending at static levels may be the best thing that we could do. And perhaps the Senate, I think that what will happen is that the Senate is going to propose to the Democrats, because they're looking for an exit ramp, a modification, whether it's, we'll support a CR, but it's going to be a full year CR, or we'll support a CR, but it's going to be a, week at a time, whatever. That's what I think that the Democratic Party is looking for, some kind of off ramp, and the pressure will mount by the November 1st.
We shall see. Mr. Fulcher, Mr. Tietzel, Mr. Burleson, thank you all. Thank you. Appreciate it. Great discussion. You can catch Fresh Freedom across all podcast platforms. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Stand strong, stay informed, and keep fighting for freedom.